welcome to EdTechnical. This is fun. Great to have you guys here.
Super glad to be here.
Awesome to be here.
Cool. So this is part 2 of a EdTech Insiders home and away conversation about AI tutoring.
Derby. It's a derby.
And so we had some great chats with you guys last time from more of a tutoring like research and efficacy perspective. And we're really excited to dig in this time to have more of a kind of company practitioner perspective with you guys. So, Ben, maybe we can just start with you. I mean, you spend lots of time talking to folks, time in schools. We'd just love to hear what you're seeing and hearing big picture about AI tutoring at the moment.
Yeah, so, I wear a couple different hats when I come at the AI tutoring question. One, I'm investing out of the Common Sense Growth Fund where it's like, yeah, AI tutoring, this is awesome. And then at night, I'm on the school board where I'm like, whoa, slow it down. Like, we can't
Right.
do too much. And I would just say, first and foremost, we all need to wrap our heads around a definition of what is tutoring and what is actually just AI-powered search. So this idea that a blank entry point on your website where you can type in any question and it's tutoring you, that's not really tutoring. That is just AI-powered search. And it's going to be very hard for most edtech companies to outperform what you can get in a ChatGPT answer, or maybe it's a Perplexity, or maybe it's some other off-the-shelf device. And, I think this is where our general tech friends are a little confused about what actually tutoring is, because they see that and they're like, the AI is teaching the child. This is amazing. And what ends up happening is that it's not structured in a way that leads towards accelerated outcomes in learning for students. So the way a human tutor actually does things is they look at your data, they look at maybe what the standards are or what the outcomes you're hoping to achieve. They understand a little bit about where you are and where you're going, and they say, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. I'm making a personal connection. Here's what we're going to work on based on, all the data that I have. Let's get started. And then the tutor is guiding a learning experience that the child is basically building skills, practicing, and ultimately, hopefully addressing misconceptions or kind of core skill gaps. And that process happens over time with intensity. And that's where you start seeing these, approximating 2 Sigma outcomes. I think it's also just important to note that we don't really see 2 Sigma outcomes in the wild. That's where someone would have 2 standard deviations of outcome because they have tutoring. But you see an acceleration when there is really effective human tutoring. So on the AI tutoring landscape, I'd say the range that we're seeing is, one, we have human tutors that are actually boosted by the AI, and the student has no AI interaction. These are programs where it might be a college student or a volunteer that's doing the tutoring, and the AI is actually making the tutor better. The second flavor that we're seeing is AI with both student and teacher, but with this kind of boost or support. And so that might be a one-to-many tutoring model where the AI is actually providing like chat assistance, encouragement, feedback, and helping someone effectively deliver on a one-to-one value proposition, but maybe they're 3-to-1 or 5-to-1. And then the third that we're seeing all the way to the extreme is actually people building full AI tutoring bots. And the most effective ones that we're seeing have a narrow scope where it can be really trained on, let's say, a geometry unit, and it can really work with that student. And sometimes they're using video or voice technology as well to make it super, super engaging. Those are the examples where it's been effective. But across the board, as you go further and further away from the teacher being the primary to the AI being the primary, you just see the quality, efficacy, and success rate like going down across that continuum.
Yeah, great. And Ben, you mentioned there your night job on a school board. And so what are you what's your school kind of most excited about? What are some of the biggest reservations they have about AI tutoring?
I think where we're most excited is this idea of practice and going to the
Hmm.
learning gym and doing your reps. So, like, reading is the kind of thing where you just need to go read a lot. And having an AI tutor that's encouraging you to read, giving you feedback on sounds, like an example of that would be the product Ello. That's really exciting. Where we're more concerned is when the AI is teaching a new or novel concept or dealing with like complex elements.
Mm.
Strawberry model came out from OpenAI. There was like this, hooray in the space that, oh, it can now do reasoning, but it actually really still cannot do complex
Mm.
thinking and introduction of new topics.
Right.
It can definitely give you feedback if you're practicing math problems though, and so that's what we're kind of leaning towards is practice. And then on the assessment side, how do you actually take what's going on in practice
Mm.
and inform that back to the teacher? We're hopeful on that. We're still not seeing those products yet closing the loop with the educator, but I think there's
Yeah.
a way in which the best tutoring dynamic is not in isolation from the school. It is actually infused into the school loop around here's where the student is, they work with a tutor, here's the data that's coming back, and that continues to feed in the learning system. In the future, we don't recognize that tutoring is going on. You're actually with an AI avatar who's your friend and your companion,
Mm.
helping you work through stuff. And some days it's like, what should I do with this conflict with my best friend? And another day it's like, I'm trying to figure out my math. So, if you can figure out zone proximal development over time, over an extended relationship through an AI, companion, that that might actually be what it looks like in
Could
middle.
be through story too. I mean, it could be like, oh, I'm trying to learn chemistry. AI makes up an incredibly compelling 10-part story that I'm going through with my AI companion, where every chapter has some really important element of chemistry. But
No, have you read The Diamond Age? This is the canonical example,
I,
right? Like
I
the
am trying to
primer.
get Neil Stephenson on right now. I'm
Oh
talking to
man,
his
okay.
agent about
Oh,
coming on
cool.
EdTech Insiders right now. I think we're going to maybe get him. He's a new book out today.
Amazing. That's a great
So
shout.
yeah, it's all about that. And Snow Crash and Diamond Age, we're going to go deep on that. It would be amazing. Yeah, exactly. But like, yeah,
That's
I
why
mean,
we have to be
friends who
careful
are,
about forcing a form factor in our current
yeah,
like non-AI age into
exactly.
a future AI age where form factors might be the most fluid because AI is especially good at flipping form factors. That's like one
Totally.
of the key benefits of the
Mm.
technology.
I mean, I had a kid once I was tutoring. We were studying SAT vocab, and I was like, what do you like? What do you care about? He said, did I tell you guys the story? I don't think so. He's
No, no,
like,
no, no, no.
Lost. I'm obsessed with the show Lost. This you could imagine when this was. And I was like, okay, we're going to connect every word in this deck to something in Lost, so you can remember it. And that's what we did. Every word. It was like, oh, Hurley is hirsute because he has all this extra hair, and Locke is this, and of course he could remember it all. It was elaboration. It's like basic pedagogy, but AI can do that way better than I can. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just super cool.
I think this social element's awesome because I think there's an open question of whether that's actually more efficacious. But if the
What,
student is already demanding it, right, it like kind of changes the whole calculation. Like if I'm already spending 3 hours a day talking to my AI buddy, and then it turns out like the only way I can kind of inject my learning dosage for the kid is like
right.
inside, then you have to accommodate, right? So it's like even the design question becomes a little bit tricky if it's like kind of the social element is first.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
this is where you can imagine the really horrible rabbit holes this could go down, where people are disassociated with other humans towards
Mm.
like AI companionship, and so
Right.
Mm.
that's what we're societally going to be dealing with. And from a generational perspective, like our generation couldn't imagine having that kind of a relationship.
Mm.
You have kids that are 18, 19, 20. They're already having relationships with like poor man versions of AI companions now. Like,
Mm.
so, there's an inevitability to some of what you just brought up, Owen.
Super interesting. I guess, kind of, Alex, just for you, I mean, building off that, maybe a bridge question is just about, the age of the student. I think we discussed this in the home match or the away match. It depends. Hey, are we home? We're home. So at the away match, we were discussing kind of how the age of the student might also be relevant, like stuff that you'd need for a college kid versus a high school kid versus a young kid is in there. And it's, at least it seems to me that maybe if you're talking about, a university student or a graduate student, actually kind of having one of these tools like, a Learn LM, or just like kind of some stuff, like they're already sophisticated enough. They kind of have their own knowledge map. It's kind of on them to master this material. And so these kind of on-demand tools can be really useful because there's not this expectation that, hey, your teacher is going to literally explain every concept to you themselves. Whereas, if we're talking about, fourth grade history, there is an expected teacher there. And I guess I was wondering how that relates to kind of the products that maybe you're seeing in this space. And so obviously you could talk about one, but I was also thinking about like how the product offering might change based on the age of the intended student.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, just building on what Ben was saying, I think that one of the things that's so interesting about this moment in AI and tutoring is that tutoring has been around for centuries. It's the original, millennia, one of the original forms of teaching for many, many people. But now we're getting to a point with AI where the idea of sort of bringing another intelligence in contact with somebody who's learning, which is basically what tutoring really is, can be broken down into lots of different components. One of them is just simply showing up and being accountable, right? The tutor walks in and the student knows that it's homework time. One is getting to know the student, as Ben said, building a relationship of trust and caring. One is breaking down problems into their steps, whether it's math or science, or actually breaking down concepts. Another is motivating the student and helping them see the relevance. There's sort of all these pieces that we've, I think, in lots of ways taken for granted about what tutoring is. But now when AI can sort of focus on any one of these, it's starting to become clearer and clearer which ones matter and specifically for which age group. So to your point, university students, a lot of the tools that are coming out for higher ed are, as you say, much more student instigated. They're much more sort of designed to make sense of a problem that a student is working on, or answer questions, or break down concepts as well as they can, or even break down the steps of problems. If somebody's asking about a complex problem, it can sort of try to break it down into steps. Whether it's capable of doing that or not is still to be seen, but that is what we're seeing a lot of the higher ed and older student products sort of focus on. But as you go down to the younger grades, there's a really big realization that the relationship building, the accountability, the motivation is core. And a lot of the tutoring that was brought into bear with the ESSER money, much of which was not AI tutoring, was also student instigated. And that was actually a problem because students don't really instigate, younger students don't really instigate tutoring on their own. They're not actively seeking help. They're not being metacognitive and being like, I could sure use something. So a lot of that went unused. You saw a lot of contracts sort of being going up in flames. And I think it's a really exciting moment because I think as the different models of tutoring start to come out, some are trying to just be companions. They're trying to be like, we've seen Axio or Ursula, companies that are literally like, we want to make a friend that stays with you and that you can talk to anything about and you can just go to for whatever reason, and you build trust over time and you can go to them. And that's what tutoring looks like in our minds. Others are much more on the sort of scan and solve, take a picture and we'll break it down and we'll maybe pop up a video or find relevant resources and do it in this very dry way, but there's no motivation, there's no sort of accountability there. And others, to Ben's point, are much more around tools to help connect, match, and support an actual human to human relationship, the sort of AI as go-between. People are trying all of these different models. The traditional tutoring companies, Saga, Varsity, are all figuring out how to, Brainly, are all starting to figure out, Go Student, how to incorporate tutoring in this way. We've talked to a company called Pearl Tutoring that has a really interesting platform. It's all about helping match the right people at the right time. And if a tutor doesn't show up, how can you instantly, using AI, find put all the schedules together and get the right person for the right time, and somebody who can actually, build a relationship quickly. It's really a Wild West situation, but I think why it's so relevant to the age, which is your original question, is that a really increased realization that older students are much more capable of using even the foundational tools like Strawberry, like, ChatGPT's models or Claude's model to tutor themselves and to really get a lot of value. Younger students need a whole lot of additional supports based on pieces of tutoring that I don't think we always appreciated in the past.
Do you feel like that, just to follow up there, do you feel like that's a real, I think there's some folks who like had no opinion about this. There are people who be hard skeptics, but then there'd be kind of folks who are like maybe AI tutor curious, we could call them, and at various different ages. And is your sense that kind of maybe those curious people are starting to get more realistic understandings of like maybe like the different components of tutoring, or we can think about like unbundling the idea of tutoring, like starting to be like, oh yeah, like it could probably do this, but it probably can't do that? Or do you think we're still kind of in peak hype mode?
I think people are looking at their data and realizing that they have to break it down. So, we see companies having hypotheses about what will work in terms of getting students to use their product, getting students to engage with it, seeing outcomes ideally as much as they can measure, seeing satisfaction from both the students and maybe educators or professors. And I think what they're realizing sort of bit by bit over time, over the last year or so when these really have been out, is that it's just not, especially for the younger grades, it's just not working as well as it should be to put a sort of AI tutor or character or, chatbot or, on-demand help kind of process in front of a student. It just doesn't get the outcomes you want. So I think the hype, I think we're coming down from the hype. And I think that all of these different tutoring companies or AI companies or incumbent EdTech companies are starting to really grapple with the harder questions. You do see a huge number of apps of like, I don't know if we characterize them as homework helpers or tutors, but some of them are unbelievably popular, and they're like people are downloading some of these apps that basically help you work through problems or solve homework or do things incredibly quickly. It's something that students are finding very compelling for a lot of different reasons, but that's clearly not the real answer to actual tutoring, because it's much more on the side of sort of giving away the answer, sort of really getting students to get their scores.
And so this is why like AI off the shelf, which is very bad at tutoring, is because it's programmed to give the answer and be low friction as like extended search would. And when you're doing zone of proximal development, if it's too hard, then the learner gives up. So this is where, what we end up seeing is that tutoring in part works because of a relational connection to the human being, and kids are willing to work through the hard parts. And then two, that educator is really able to diagnose motivation and frustration given zone of proximal development, which is a very subtle thing to be able to measure. I will say there's a new company called Dewey Learn that I think is really interesting in that it uses facial and physical cues to understand if there's a reduction in engagement of the student learner. And as much as I would have thought this is more relevant to the younger learners, it's actually quite relevant to college students, where you find that first year and second year or freshman, sophomore in college, their propensity to give up on something that's hard is a rate limiting factor for college retention. And there is this kind of, as you break it down, like if you can just measure engagement levels and find areas where engagement's dropping, and then have the AI itself or nudge the instructor to boost, that's something that is out of this field.
That's so interesting. Like, I think what's interesting, like you hear a lot of these demos and, all these, tech luminaries are like, oh, these tutors are amazing. But you're like, Bill Gates was almost assuredly an extremely motivated student.
Right.
Right? Like he was the dude who was like not only reading the homework, but was also reading the next relevant book on his own. And so like his version of learning, he's like, oh, this is amazing. You're like, yeah, for Bill Gates, like in 16-year-old
For self-directed learners, it's great. Yeah.
Right. But you're like, that's a really, I mean, you know, I'm definitely not that, you know, and so like, and especially the most struggling students, if they're not already feeling positive about this becomes like a bad job. Right. And so then you're like, that's, you know, this is not going to be a very effective tool for you. It seems kind of what you're saying.
I think we're kind of talking about reading and math as like a subtext here, but I will just say, if you imagine an AI tutor for coding, this would be an example of where it's actually having some real breakthroughs. In the past, the degree of code that you needed to learn to actually create a novel product was so high as a barrier to entry that you couldn't get into the zone of proximal development for a lot of kids. But actually the kind of AI coding and no code and the way they've structured the tutoring, because it's like metacognitive, like the AI for the AI coding, we're actually seeing a really good loop there. AI tutoring in languages, we're seeing like some really good promising loops there, because the idea of like, I can't speak a full language, it's too out of reach for me, I'm going to give up. It's bringing it down closer to your zone of proximal development. So I think that's what we've got to look for, is areas where AI is reducing the barrier to learn and improving the, you know, productive learning friction, and areas where it's reducing that productive friction too much and is just giving you the answer.
Yeah. That's a cool kind of rule of thumb. It's like, actually, if like a quick check is like, hey, is it managing the zone of proximal development effectively? If not, be super skeptical. Like maybe it'll work for edge cases, but like if it's not taking that seriously, it's probably not going to be helping most learners.
Yeah. And then I also have the question of what's the human in the loop strategy with this? Is it a data exhaust where it's passive, or is it actually like reintroducing the human who can help retune the product or the AI and so on? I also would just say, like, maybe, you know, we've talked about learner difference. Maybe there's different ways in which AI tutoring as it is works for highly self-directed, motivated students. And we need to have different dosage protocols and like instrumentation with different groups and across different subject areas. And I think that's the kind of complexity that our like news media would just like want to write over. But those of us who are pedagogues understand, like, okay, each learning case actually has some unique friction points and aspects.
Yeah, totally. And Ben, we've been talking here about some of the kind of possibilities around this and some of the enabling conditions, I guess, or things that need to be in place to help AI tutoring work well. What about some of the risks? Like, what do you see as some of the risks that you're worried about here?
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything revolutionary about the risks. You know, data privacy, hallucinations, you know, inaccurate teaching and learning. I think we've just seen a lot of confidence from our AI overlords, and yet they can be very inaccurate with like the simplest tasks. I will just say, I'll take the other side of that. The risk of us not using AI is that we stick with the system we've got, which is really not doing very much for a lot of learners. And so, you know, I kind of, you know, when I hear people pushing back on, you know, the accuracy rate of 95%, well, I'm like, what's the accuracy rate of, you know, no teacher at all? And I am particularly bullish in developing country contexts about the opportunity with AI tutors just to revolutionize access for pedagogical instruction and friction. But I do think there's a risk of inaction. I don't know, Alex, what do you think?
I totally agree. I think the comparison has to be made against a real baseline, which is sometimes hard to know what the baseline is for something like tutoring. We just don't always have the data, but people are working on it. I would add two other risks that I think are going to be very interesting when it comes to tutoring as we start, you know, evolving this. One is the political risk, the idea of, when you have an ongoing relationship with a tool, or there is the risk of being able to ask that tool about things that have, political, leanings or opinions that are baked in. And I think just because we've, seen this over and over again, especially in K-12 for the last few years, I think there is a risk that, these AI tools, they're creating, characters, quote unquote, in some cases, and the characters have the risk of rubbing people the wrong way, especially parents, or giving answers that can be screenshot and say, wait, they asked about, the causes of the American, of slavery, and this is what it answered. Oh my gosh, that's not what I would have taught. So I think that's going to start raising its head soon. The other is even more sci-fi crazy out there, much more, which is that we've seen some really interesting results with Replica, a company that makes avatars, where there is definitely a growing movement of people having ongoing relationships with AI characters or AI bots, just not real intelligences. I think there's currently this line that people are drawing where they say, well, a human tutor is motivating and a AI tutor is not, because people know it's fake and they just don't want to treat it like anything, and they just won't, they won't buy into it. And I think that's a temporary state. I just personally, I think that it will not be long before people start treating certain types of AI very much like humans. And with that, you're going to have a whole slew of new risks that come with any kind of relationship. People will, start to hate their tutors, and they'll start to fall in love with their tutors, or they'll start to be dependent on their tutors, or they'll start to ask their tutors about things that are inappropriate, and the tutors won't know how to answer them. I mean, so I know
just like childhood development, like there's like all the obviously like the NSFW, bad acronym, but like implication. But there's also just like, what does it do to a 7-year-old if one of your best friends only communicates virtually, right? Like that's like totally sci-fi, but also like basically here.
It's coming. I really think it's coming. And the idea of, just back to the other point, like, what is a tutor actually doing? It's not actually, I don't know if anybody has the best, like a full grasp of what a tutor is actually doing. In some cases, just having, a presence in your life that cares that you do your homework or not might make a big difference. Cares, quote unquote. Cares could mean lots of different things in this case. I think we've been focusing on sort of breaking down teaching, but teaching and tutoring are not actually the same. Tutoring has elements of psychology. It has elements of childcare. It has elements of mentoring and coaching, and it's just going to get really messy. But I think actually going to get really interesting when we start having when people start breaking through and creating tutors that really do connect. I agree, and yes, I think that will happen. I think that's going to happen sooner than we think. You're going to start seeing people saying, "Oh my God, the only person my child trusts or talks to is their AI."
Yeah, right. It's kind of like the way picky eaters will now only like talk to like, oh, I don't want to talk to my teacher. I just want to talk to my virtual tutor because they always tell me I'm right or something, right?
Yes.
Wow. Fascinating stuff. I feel like maybe we should do a whole season just about tutoring. Just keep the conversation going for another 9 episodes together. Cool, guys. Fascinating stuff. This was awesome. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you all so much. And for those who want to check out EdTech Insiders, you can check out our Substack. It's edtechinsiders.substack.com, and we'd love to have listeners cross over. And we will be having happy hours at South by Southwest EDU and ASU GSV. So for your listeners who are making it across the pond, make sure to check us out at one of those big events.
Awesome. We'll see you there.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.